I'm Edward October. The sound you hear is a spooky cocktail party, already in progress. This is the start of Octoberpod. We're here at the Octoberpod Ranch in the Great Smoky Mountains. Almost every night here there's a horror story party. Why don't you join us? Pour yourself a cocktail or, if you don't drink, a tall, cold glass of sun tea and listen in on this horror story happy hour. But first, a couple of caveats. To start with, there will be no intermission. Just non-stop chillers. Secondly, all of the stories we're about to tell are true. Some are even told by the very people who experienced them. And finally, our horror story happy hour is never just an hour long. Do you all have refreshments? Good. Let's begin.
In my hometown, when I was growing up, we didn't have Bloody Mary. I mean, that just wasn't a story anyone ever told. But we did have something similar. We had CARRION CATHY. They call her CARRION CATHY because, as a ghost, she kinda looks a bit like roadkill, or rotten meat. Cathy's backstory is kinda stupid. She lived in a nice-ish house with her asshole parents, you know, real corporate ladder climbers. The story goes that Cathy's birthday was either on Halloween or Friday the 13th. I could never keep it straight. Anyways, one year, her asshole parents forgot her birthday, her sweet 16. Cathy, who wasn't all there mentally, flew into a rage. She killed her whole family with her dad's shotgun and then slit her wrists with a razor. She bled out and died on the couch right next to her dead parents, but not before writing, "Happy fucking birthday to me" on the bathroom mirror, in her own blood. The house was abandoned, but it still stands, mostly, and everybody calls it the Happy Birthday House. Now, legend has it that if you go to the Happy Birthday House and look in that bathroom mirror and chant "Happy Birthday to me" 5 times, CARRION CATHY will appear right behind you in the mirror and either kill you or drag you to hell. Allegedly. So, on Halloween night during our senior year, me and my friends thought it'd be a good idea to find the house and summon Cathy. The house was creepy AF and looked just the way you'd expect. It had 2 bathrooms, and the mirrors in both had been broken. However, kids had spray painted "Happy fucking birthday" on every wall of the house. At the time, I thought the story was a load of horse shit, so I volunteered to be the one to look in the mirror. We knew the mirrors in the house would be broken, so we brought our own. It was just past midnight, and there were no lights other than a weak flashlight we'd brought. I propped the mirror against the bathroom sink and said the words 5 times, and, of course, nothing happened. We all went home that night feeling a little foolish and a little disappointed, but very stoned. Oops, I guess I forgot to tell you that part. Weird things started to happen the next day. I got out of the shower and got the shock of my life when I saw the reflection of a girl standing right behind me in the bathroom mirror. Her skin was gray and her hair was matted, and she was looking at me with these black eyes filled with hate. And her face, Jesus Christ, I can't even describe it, but it looked like the personification of death and decay. I rolled around, but there was no one there. I saw her again the next day, in the rearview mirror of my car as I was backing out of the driveway. She must have been close enough to touch my bumper. That night, I caught sight of her in a big mirror behind the dining room table. She was staring at me from the foyer at the bottom of the stairs. I saw her at least once every day for the next week. Each time she was a little farther away until the day she didn't appear at all. When I went home to college, she'd appear to me whenever I went home for holidays or between semesters. It got so bad that I started covering the mirrors in my room and bathroom. To this day, I still see her sometimes, and always whenever I visit my parents' house. It scares me every time. I don't think I'll ever get used to seeing her face.
It's times like these I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched.
When I was young and stupid, I went camping inside the BURREN National Park in northern County Clare. I was stealth camping because camping of any kind is strictly forbidden in the Burren, and if I'd been caught, it would have meant a world of trouble for me. If you don't know about the Burren, it's one of the most unique places to visit in the whole of Ireland. In the whole of the world, actually. It's full of craggy rocks and heather and has been described as this otherworldly, almost lunar sort of landscape. And for that reason, hiding there is very difficult indeed. I'd set my tent up against a rock formation out in the middle of nowhere. From that vantage point, I could see for miles. There was no one about, just my dog Chester and me. I had just dozed off in my sleeping bag when I heard Chester making this deep, low growl. I unzipped the tent and looked out. There was a child about 12 to 14 years old, off in the distance. He was all alone walking towards me. I was afraid he was lost or in trouble. After all, no one was allowed to be camping out here. So I approached to see if he needed help. When I got as close as 10 meters from him, Chester panics and starts barking like an animal at bay. Teeth bared, tail tucked, hugging the ground. Chester never behaved like that. I normally joke that if I were ever robbed, he'd beg the robbers for pets and a treat. I had to drag Chester on his leash to get any closer. I approached the boy to apologise for my dog and to offer my help if he needed it. But the boy just sort of ignored me. Didn't speak. He just gave me this vacant stare, slowly tilting his head to one side. Then he just kept walking in the same direction as before. Chester freaked out again, and I got down on one knee to try and calm him down. When I looked back up, I saw that the kid was gone. Remember, this was like camping on the moon. You could see for miles. There was no way this boy could have gotten out of my sight so quickly. Many of my more spiritual friends are absolutely certain that Chester was protecting me from an evil spirit.
The Invitational, a true story submitted anonymously, narrated by Mike, co-host of BREWCRIME podcast. Back when I was in college, I worked as a cart boy during my breaks. It was a sweet gig, and sometimes I'd get some pretty generous tips, even though we weren't technically supposed to accept them. Every July, the club would host a men's invitational, and the players would leave their bags on their carts overnight. I'm talking upwards of $100,000 worth of clubs and gear. So the pro at our club told me and this other kid that worked there to camp out in the cart barn overnight to watch the bags. Sort of like overnight security, and I think he paid us a nice little bonus under the table. So we ordered a shitload of pizza and listened to the radio and played small stakes poker all night to keep from getting bored. We even took some practice swings with a couple of the pricier drivers on hand. It was almost a summer camp type vibe. What made it feel more like a summer camp was that this country club was right up against the woods. We were already in the middle of nowhere, a selling point to our members who wanted to get away from it all whenever they played. But this particular cart barn was on the far edge of the property that butted up against the tree line of acres and acres of woodland. So if you were up there at night with the lights off, you wouldn't believe how dark and quiet it would get. And like I said, this was in July, so you'd expect to hear a lot of insects and other critters at night, but you could just about hear a pin drop. I was glad we were smart enough to bring that radio with us. Otherwise, the silence would have been pretty unsettling. Now, even though we were supposed to stay up all night babysitting the carts, we still brought sleeping bags and pads. And by around 1 or 2 in the morning, we decided to get a little bit of rack time. This was in the late 90s, so we didn't have smartphones in our pockets that could have been used as alarm clocks. But we did have a little wind-up kitchen timer that I'd have the foresight to bring with me so that we could catch an hour of sleep here and there. But as it turned out, we wouldn't have any trouble waking up. Sometime between 2:30 and 3 in the morning, I remember because I looked at the kitchen timer and saw that it wasn't supposed to go off for another 20 minutes or so, we were startled awake by a loud metallic bang of something pounding on the metal roof of the cart barn. It sounded like a tree branch or a large rock had bounced off the roof, but then it kept going, like something really big was on the roof trying to cave it in. We turned all the lights on in the barn, as well as a flashlight that we shined up to the ceiling. In the beam of the flashlight, we could see the sheet metal of the roof rippling as if from footsteps, or from somebody pounding on it. There was also another sound, like the heavy breathing of a large animal, almost like a Chewbacca sound. Whatever it was, it sounded big and like nothing I'd ever heard before. Just thinking about that sound makes me all teary-eyed with fear. This went on for about 15 or 20 minutes, and during that whole time, we were paralyzed with fear, unable to do anything but huddle between 2 golf carts. I guess we were thinking that if the roof caved in, the golf carts would shield us a little from whatever fell on us. And then... as soon as that alarm went off, the banging stopped. At sunup, we ventured out to see what the damage was. There were some sizable dents and scratches left in the sheet metal on the cart barn, and it was all along the side facing the woods. The ground around it was torn up as if a large animal had been rooting around in it. Funny as it may sound, I believe that whatever had attacked the cart barn must have been frightened away by our alarm.
I had just landed my first big corporate job out of college and was new to the city. Between long hours at the office and frequent happy hours with coworkers, I often found myself taking a later train home. A lot of times, I would ride the last train of the night. My stop closest to my house was near the end of the line, which meant a long commute on the train with a switchover to another train on another line in the middle of my trip. Anyway, I got used to sitting all alone, or mostly alone, in those huge underground stations while I waited for a train. It was always a little spooky, but when you do it day in and day out, you get used to it. Once in a while, I'd see trains pull into the stations with the lights off in the last 2 cars. I assumed these cars were out of service for whatever reason. Typically, the doors to these darkened cars, or ghost cars as I began to think of them, wouldn't open when the train pulled into the station. Like I said, I always assumed these cars were out of service due to electrical or some other technical issues. But one night, I was out late after an epic session at a new bar near DuPont Circle. The metro was busy that night. I remember I was sitting on a bench watching a group of kids dancing when my train pulled up. I saw that on this train, the last 2 cars were ghost cars, except this time, the doors opened. Don't ask me why I did it. Maybe it was because I was buzzed. Maybe the noise of that busy metro station was getting to me. Maybe I just wanted to doze off on the train and not be bothered by people. But for whatever reason, I boarded one of the unlit ghost cars. At first, it was really cool and somewhat relaxing. Nobody else on board to bother me, nice and quiet, no offensive odors, etc. All I could see were the lights inside the tunnel as they whizzed by. It was hypnotic watching them pass, like being aboard a spaceship at warp speed. Then, I noticed we weren't stopping at any stations, weren't even passing through any stations. It was all tunnel. I told myself that I'd been nodding off and had slept through all the stops, but I finally breathed a sigh of relief when we pulled into my station. Weird thing was, the digital station identification screens inside and outside the train didn't display the name of my stop. The screens just said, "End of line." It was weird, but in the moment I didn't give it much thought. I was the only passenger to get off the train, even though I hadn't noticed us stopping at any other stations, and I remember that other people were piling into the other train cars, the ones with the lights on, when I got on. Yet, as I stepped off the train and onto the platform, I couldn't see anyone else anywhere in the train as it disappeared into the tunnel. My stop was in another underground station, and I was used to it being much quieter than the bustling stops downtown, but not quite like this. There was no one in this station but me. No other passengers, no station manager, no metro police, not even other trains pulling in and out of the station. No one. Again, this in itself wasn't all that odd. I kept unusual hours and was used to finding deserted stations, especially this late at night. But this one was different, like a tomb. I got on the escalator to leave the station, but it took me up to the same platform I was trying to leave. Not a similar platform, but the exact same platform. The signs and advertisement, the lights, even the blobs of chewing gum on the concrete were identical. In a panic, I rode the escalator several times, but always ended up in the same place. And to prove to myself it was the same place, I took some lipstick out of my purse and drew a star on the corner of one of the benches. The next time I rode the escalator, I ran to the bench and saw that the star I'd drawn was still there. Every time I returned to the platform, it was always the same bench with the same star drawn on it with lipstick. Until one time, I walked past it and noticed that the lipstick had been smeared, even though I had never touched it and had not sat on the bench since drawing it. I freaked out, as you can imagine. I must have gone up those escalators dozens of times trying to find a way out. I forgot to mention there was no emergency exit doors anywhere. I was starting to wonder whether I'd have to run into the blackness of the tunnels, use a cell phone, which had no service in this station, as a flashlight to find a way out. I was working up the courage to do just that when the most f***ed up thing happened. I heard voices. It almost sounded like two people having a conversation at the farthest end of the platform. The sound of their voice would cut in and out, and I could never quite place where they were. I kept turning around to try to spot them, but the voices always seemed out of reach. If I was on the escalator, it would sound as though they were on the platform, and if I was on the platform, I could hear the voices receding like people chatting on the escalator. Finally, I grew tired and just wanted a place to hide. I climbed under the bench I'd drawn the star on, half expecting the owner or owners of those voices to walk by any second. Scared as I was, I had to keep fighting sleep. And just as my eyes began to shut, I'd hear the voices again. This time, I hear the voice, and it sounds like the speaker is whispering just over my shoulder. It said, "We were never really alive." Suffice it to say, it took me about 3/4 of a second to nope it right out of there, running down the platform. My legs caught on some object, on an empty platform, that nearly tripped me, but I didn't stop. Whatever it was had cut my leg, leaving a scar that I have to this day. And then, a moment later, a real train, not a ghost train, rolled into the station. I boarded it at a sprint, and pressed my body against the walls of the train at the farthest point from the open door, afraid that the thing in the station might follow me inside. I felt blood trickling down my leg from my wound, but couldn't bring myself to look down. When the train finally arrived at my stop, I jogged all the way home. I haven't been able to figure out how I ended up on that strange car, and how I managed to escape that ghost station. But I haven't gotten on another train since that night. I probably never will.
I run a convenience store on the road leading up to a lake that is popular with local anglers. Because so many folks are passing through for a weekend of fishing, I make sure that the store is well stocked with everything that you need or want for your fishing trip. That means plenty of bags of Takis, every kind of beer you can imagine, and live bait. Now, I'm not one of those guys that goes out with a shovel after it rains to dig up and package my own worms. I've got a distributor that supplies me with all the live bait I sell. I always keep night crawlers, bloodworms, mealworms, and waxworms in stock and keep them in a big refrigerator case up front. Most of my customers, as I've said, are just passing through on the way to the lake. They might come once every summer, or I might not see them again in my life. Regardless, I'm not used to having regulars. Except for this guy we called Roly-Poly. He was a short, pudgy feller with a greasy bowl haircut like Mo from the Three Stooges, and the palest, waxiest looking skin I've ever seen. So white that it almost looked blue. He came in at least once a week or more, always wearing a tank top or sleeveless shirt and stained cargo shorts and flip-flops. And whenever he was in the store, the only thing he'd look at and the only thing he'd buy was worms. I don't know if he was a fisherman or not. He never bought any bait other than worms, and never bought any other fishing supplies. Hell, he didn't even buy so much as a bottle of water off of us. Only worms. All the different variety of worms we carried, and in massive quantities. If we ever saw Roly-Poly walking in and we were low or out of stock of worms, we knew we'd be sold out by the time he left. And if he ever did buy all of our remaining stock, he'd ask when we'd get more in. And every time he'd ask, we'd say our distributor always delivered on Tuesday, and we'd restock then. One Tuesday, after a particularly busy weekend, might have been 4th of July, Memorial Day, I can't remember. We'd sold out of everything and could see clear to the bottom of the refrigerator case. Except on this particular Tuesday, the delivery never came, in spite of the fact that I'd gotten notifications that the delivery had been made. It was a big mess getting everything sorted out with the distributor and ordering and scheduling another drop-off. And after that day, Roly-Poly stopped coming in. About a week later, the police contacted me and told me that they'd located a shipment of bait that was meant for me. They said that it looked like my shipment had been stolen by a local man whose name I didn't recognize. But I'd later find out that this was Roly-Poly's real name. The policeman who spoke to me wasn't forthcoming with the details. He only said that they'd found my worms, that the shipment had been overturned and, quote, spoiled, and that Roly-Poly had been found dead at the scene, though there was no evidence that he'd been the victim of foul play. And that's all he'd told me. Just enough to get me to verify that yes, I had had a shipment of bait go missing, and yes, the bait they found at the crime scene appeared to match what I'd ordered. As you can imagine, this raised more questions in my mind. I asked a friend who was a paramedic who knew a guy that worked at the sheriff's office, and I found out, unofficially, that they'd found Roly-Poly's corpse inside a shed behind his house. They said it looked like he'd cracked open every container of worms that he, presumably, had stolen from me and dumped them on the moist dirt of the shed. He died of a heart attack while rolling or bathing or doing something else in that pile of live worms. He was naked except for some sort of tight-fitting PVC mask laying face down in the dirt and worms. He'd been dead for several days and the worms had gotten everywhere. They said that when the coroner cut the PVC mask off his head, well, they said it wasn't a pretty sight under there.
Keep your eye on the ball. A true story submitted by Twiggly Piggly 86, narrated by Molly Frank, also known as Miss Molly Knows. My first husband died when our daughter Mika was very young. It wasn't easy raising a little girl all by myself, but everyone in the family pitched in. especially my brother-in-law, Dwayne. There were a handful of golf courses in our immediate area, and he worked at the largest one. They had him doing a variety of things, but usually he worked in the pro shop. Childcare was always an issue for me, especially early on, but my brother-in-law was happy to pitch in. If I ever needed to go into work and couldn't find or afford a sitter, I'd drop Mika off with her Uncle Dwayne at the pro shop. The owner didn't mind having her around. The pro shop was never that busy, and Dwayne usually had her helping him out in some way. One day, I dropped Mika off with Dwayne at the pro shop. She was maybe 6 or 7. The weather was misty and miserable, but not wet enough to keep the hardcore golfers away. I had some financial business I needed to discuss with Dwayne before I left for work. Anyway, we weren't paying too much attention to Mika and just let her wander around the pro shop. A few minutes passed, and I turned to leave, and Mika was gone without a trace. I won't even attempt to describe the terror I experienced. I mean, she disappeared for something like 2 hours. We looked everywhere. Dwayne and a couple of guys even got a golf cart and looked for her on the course, asking the handful of golfers playing if they'd seen her. I was starting to wonder if she'd fallen into the pond and drowned when she calmly walked back in through the door of the pro shop. Mika was cold and damp from being out in the mist, but otherwise she was fine. She was in great spirits, in fact, all giggly. By this time, Dwayne and the owner and a few other guys showed up and all gathered around Mika to find out where she'd been. She said that a sweet old man in dark glasses had been standing outside the clubhouse and waved at her through the window. She went outside to say hello to him, and he asked her if she'd like to take a walk and retrieve some lost golf balls with him. Mika thought that sounded like great fun and took him by the hand for a stroll. She said the man gave her a little bucket in which to collect all the balls she found. The owner asked her where the bucket was, and Mika said that she'd left it outside. Sure enough, there was a little blue bucket, half filled with lost golf balls, sitting just outside the door to the pro shop. I asked her who the man was and where he went. Mika just shrugged. "I don't know," she said, "but I asked him why he was wearing sunglasses when the sun ain't out, and he said something really silly." I asked her, what did he say? Mika said it was because he only has one eye and the glasses hide his eye hole. She laughed and said the man kept his eye in his pocket if she wanted to see it. But thankfully, she didn't ask to see it. It was at this point that the owner became very interested. He took Mika to a little lounge area in another part of the clubhouse and showed her a picture of a group of middle-aged men posing for some award or other. Mika pointed to one of the men in the picture and said, "That's him!" The owner patted her on her shoulder and told her that she had seen Otis, an old friend of his who always liked to be silly and who had a granddaughter about her age. The owner was speaking reassuringly to Mika, but when he glanced over his shoulder at Dwayne, I could see concern in his eyes. A couple of days later, when I ran into Dwayne again, I asked him about Otis. His eyes filled with the exact same look of dread and concern, and he said, "About 10 years ago, Otis was playing this course as part of his regular foursome. They'd had a lot to drink, and Otis was already drunk after the first few holes. There was a freak accident. Otis was standing too close to the tee box when one of the other guys in his foursome was teeing off at precisely the wrong moment. Otis, who was very drunk, stumbled and caught a downswing to the face. It popped his eye right out of its socket." I gasped and asked Dwayne if they were able to save the eye. Dwayne shook his head. "No," he said. "Otis suffered massive head trauma in addition to the eye and died before they could get him to the hospital."
The Empty House, a listener-submitted true story, narrated by MJ McAddams.
This happened to me during my first year of grad school. I was broke at the time. Well, still am, thanks to student loan debt. And I would take on dog-sitting gigs for some extra cash. One of my professors hired me to stay the long weekend at his house while he was away at a conference. My main responsibilities were to take care of the dog, a Scottish Terrier named Teddy, and not to make any messes. The house was on the outskirts of our little university town in a sort of wooded subdivision. Most of the homes there were old brick ranchers built in the 1980s. It seemed like every other lot in the community was empty. There'd be a house, then an empty lot with trees and tall grass in it, then another lot with a house, then a lot with trees. Kind of like a checkerboard pattern. Not gonna lie, it was a little bit unsettling. Though I didn't realize that at the time. But, on the other hand, it was a great neighborhood for walking a dog.
Teddy and I were both night owls. He kept me company while I was studying or watching TV late at night, and he also didn't bother me to go potty early in the morning because we both liked to sleep in. I stayed from Thursday night through Monday evening. I didn't have a class on Friday, and Monday was a school holiday. On Thursday night, I established a ritual of taking Teddy out for a long walk well after midnight. This was our favorite walk of the day. For Teddy, it meant exploring the neighborhood and sniffing for critters that aren't normally out at a decent hour. And it gave me an opportunity to smoke a joint in peace. I was a huge stoner that semester. We did a loop around the whole neighborhood. It was about a mile and a half when it was all said and done. And Teddy was always ready for bed when we got home. There was an empty house about halfway down the block. It looked slightly newer than all the others, but it also looked as though no one had lived there in quite some time. There was a sign in the yard advertising an open house, but the date on the sign was about 2 years in the past. Now, Teddy is a sniffer, and always had to check out all the smells in all the lawns. But not this house. Whenever we got to the empty house, he'd stop sniffing and trot his little ass up to the next lot. The lot next door was completely wooded and like a jungle, so there was a lot to hold the dog's interest and plenty of soft grass to go potty on. On my last night dog sitting, I took Teddy out on his walk later than usual, between 1:30 and 1:45 a.m. I just finished writing the first draft of a big research paper and decided to celebrate by smoking the rest of the herb I'd gotten for the week. I wouldn't be able to smoke again until the following weekend, so I thought there'd be no harm in getting hella stoned on my last night. It was a cool night. Bright stars, but no moon, and unusually quiet. You couldn't even hear any cars in the distance on the highway, just the sounds of Teddy's walking and the faint jingling of the metal tag on his collar. I was really enjoying myself, and really savoring my joint. Probably the most pleasant walk of my stay. And then we got to the empty house. Teddy stopped dead in his tracks and refused to walk past it. He got all stubborn and wouldn't move, no matter how much I yanked on his leash. I finally had to pick him up to walk him past the house. And then I noticed it. There was a light dancing around inside the house. There were no curtains or blinds on any of the windows. Remember, nobody lived there. So I could see right in. It looked like someone with a flashlight prowling around the house, walking up and down stairs. The light of the flashlight was bluish, like it had one of those LED bulbs in it, and bright. I never saw who was holding the light, only the beam of the light itself. Like I said, it looked like a prowler inside the house, looking for something. Like, looking for stuff to steal. But it was an empty house. There'd be nothing to steal from it. There was one other odd detail. Sometimes the light would cast a shadow on the walls, like the shadow of a couch or a bookshelf or a dining room chair. But there was no furniture in the house to cast a shadow. And once, just for a split second, I thought I could see the shadow of a very tall man. I squeezed Teddy tight and ran all the way back to the professor's house. I didn't realize, until I was struggling to unlock the front door, that I still had a fat, half-smoked doobie hanging from my lips. I realize now that I should have called the police. But for one thing, I wasn't sure that I'd actually seen a crime. Or at the very least, I'd caught someone, squatting in the empty house. If you'd been there, you would have been frightened too. But when I tried to describe what happened in words, it sounded underwhelming. Hardly something the police needed to get involved in. On top of that, I started to get paranoid about my weed and didn't want to go anywhere near the cops. I was afraid I'd either get busted for possession or they'd think I was having some sort of hallucination from smoking weed. Which, weed doesn't work like that. So I split the difference and told my professor what happened. Almost the way it happened, minus the fat joint I'd smoked. He listened patiently to my story about how I thought there'd been some kind of home invasion at the empty house. He was nodding his head the whole time until I was done speaking. Then, he said he'd heard familiar stories from the neighbors and that, yes, there was a home invasion at that house. About 3 years ago. He said a family, a general contractor and his wife, who was a nurse, I think he said, and their teenage son and daughter lived there. He said he'd see them all the time whenever he was out with Teddy. One night, someone broke into their home. When the police arrived, they found the mother and the 2 kids dead in their beds. Gunshots to the head. All 3. They also found the dad. He'd been shot on the stairs holding a hunting rifle, presumably in pursuit of the intruder. There was a trail of blood to suggest that the dad had wounded the intruder with the rifle, but no one ever found a body. And the identity of the killer remains a mystery. The house has been on the market ever since.
Granddad was a true outdoorsman from a very young age. Once, when he was about 11, he went fishing in a little creek that meandered through the family farm. At that age, he was obsessed with westerns and always went fishing in a black straw Hopalong Cassidy cowboy hat. Does anyone remember who Hopalong Cassidy was? He was a cowboy played by a white-haired old man, wore all black, including his hat, and rode a white horse. That cowboy hat was good for fishing, he said, because it provided excellent shade from the sun, and he loved it because it came with a whistle. And since it was made of straw, it wouldn't make him as hot as a felt hat would. Can you tell that Granddad loved that hat? Anyway, he was out fishing this creek at its widest point. It was a blustery day, so blustery, in fact, that the little chin strap did nothing to keep Granddad's beloved hat from blowing away. He said that hat sailed off his head and into the creek and then just kept going. He ran after it, hoping it would get caught on a tree branch or wash up along the side of the creek where he could get at it. Which it did, except it ended up on the opposite side of the creek, where the brush was pretty thick. He had to find a safe place to cross the creek and then backtrack over to it. The day was not only blustery, but also cloudy, and so it was quite dark on that side of the creek with its dense patches of trees and brush. Granddad crossed over to the spot where his hat had washed up and saw that it had moved. In its place, he saw a strange woman. Strange as in he'd never seen her around before, and strange as in strange. She wasn't dressed for creeking, that's for sure. He said she wore a dress or robe of pure white that was wet up to her knees from wading in the creek. Her skin was just as colorless as her dress. Granddad said that she looked like a young woman in her 20s. She was pretty too, except for the fact that she had deep crow's feet at the corners of her pale blue eyes, and she didn't have any eyebrows. Her hair was long and brittle and the color of fresh-cut wheat. She wore a red scarf wrapped tight around her neck and face, hiding her mouth, like a bandit in a western. She looked straight at him and held the Hopalong Cassidy hat in front of her, as if to give it back to him. Granddad didn't take it, though. He was too scared and ran back home and never fished in that creek again. Well, he did fish there again, but only one more time. Years later, decades later. He was in his 50s, and it was right before they auctioned off the farm. Granddad claimed it'd been so long that he'd forgotten what had happened that day when he was a boy. Well, either that or he'd convinced himself it had been a daydream. He'd fished all morning and was ready to pack up his tackle and call it a day when he saw it. A black straw cowboy hat, sized for a child's head, floating towards him against the flow of water in the creek. He grabbed it and saw it was his old Hopalong Cassidy hat. Not a hat just like it, the exact same hat. He knew because he had his initials written on a tag around the sweatband. He even recognized his crude little boy handwriting. The hat looked just as it had the day he lost it, not a day older, and no worse for wear. Granddad held the hat in his hand, marveling at how it could have possibly returned to his possession. And when he looked up, he saw her, the same woman in pure white, with the same pale skin and hairless eyebrows, and with the same red scarf and hair like fresh-cut wheat. The first time he told me the story, I asked him what happened next. He told me that the weird woman showed him something awful, and then refused to say anything else. In fact, he left the room after telling the story and didn't really speak for the rest of the night. Many years later, not long before Granddad died, in fact, I again asked what the woman had showed him when he saw her that second time. He eventually said that she took off her scarf, and when she did, her jaw unhinged, as though the scarf had been the only thing holding her jawbone in place. He said he could see she had a head full of needle-sharp teeth. Huh? The hat? Oh, Granddad burned it in the wood stove, burned it and scattered the ashes. Said he couldn't bear to have it in the house.
Not long ago, I convinced my girlfriend to go on a 3-day hiking trip through Cherokee National Forest on some of the more obscure and least traveled trails. She's a more experienced hiker than I am, especially when it comes to backcountry and off-trail hikes. She wasn't crazy about some of the trails I had planned to take. She tried to convince me to hike on trails frequented by more tourists and day hikers. Now I wish I'd listened to her. About a mile in, I could feel the woods closing in on us, enough to feel completely isolated. On the first morning after breaking camp, we started to notice a lot of little bones along the trail. And that's not all that unusual, but we started to see them everywhere. I don't remember what we were thinking. Reading it on paper and knowing what happened next, that should have been our signal to turn around and go back. For whatever reason, we decided it made more sense to keep hiking the way we were going. By about noon, it seemed like the trail was practically paved with these little bones. Then we walk around this bend in the trail and find a fully nude man crouching in the middle of the trail. I looked around the edges of the trail when I saw him, expecting to see a pile of clothes or gear. Nothing, though. He had a long beard and an unkept rat's nest for hair. It looked like he hadn't bathed in his entire life. He was crunching on something. The three of us sort of stood and stared at one another for a full minute, like deer staring into headlights. Then he bolted away from the trail so fast that the wilderness just seemed to swallow him up. And this was miles and miles from any kind of civilization. We took a few moments to gather our wits and took a few long breaths. Then we walked over to the spot where he'd been crouched. There in the dirt was this old, crumpled aluminum pie tin. And inside were the remains of a partially eaten stray cat.
Monster Putt Rally, a listener-submitted true story. Narrated by Amelia, co-host of Pitney and Amelia's Bitchin' Boutique. Whenever money was tight, or if I was between jobs, I'd work at the miniature golf course my parents owned as a sort of side gig. I'd worked there off and on for over a decade before discovering firsthand that it's very haunted. It's called Forbidden Island Miniature Golf, located just off the Strip in Beach. The building is shaped like a volcano, with red and orange lights to make the waterfall look like lava, that house two 18-hole courses, an outdoor course and an indoor course. The outdoor course, which wound its way around the base of the volcano, was tiki-themed, bright and happy, with lots of tropical music playing over the stereo speakers hidden throughout the course. The indoor course was a bit spookier. It was themed like a cave filled with bloodthirsty pirates, treasure, and a few monsters. The music here was a rip-off of the Pirates of the Caribbean soundtrack, but there were also drippy, echoey, ambient cave sounds. This course was our bread and butter attraction on rainy summer days or in the off-season, when that was the only course we'd open. This thing I'm about to tell you happened in the off-season. I don't know if you've ever been to a beach town in the off-season, but it can be rather creepy, especially at night. Buildings that are usually brightly lit are dark. The roads that are usually clogged are empty, and places where you'd normally only hear the bustle of commerce and tourism are now quiet enough that you can hear distant crashing waves. Usually, there'd be two of us working, but on this night I was closing by myself because everyone else had gone home early. I rushed through the cleanup and close down routine at the sales counter and in the lobby to the indoor course. Now, the first task when closing up is making sure all customers are out of the building and that all doors are locked, which I did. I was alone in the building, and there was no way anyone else could have gotten in. As soon as I'd finished closing out the register, I heard a loud crash, crash somewhere in the pirate cave. There was a back exit on the 11th hole of that course. It was a glass door that we'd blacked out with some kind of tinting film so that the daylight wouldn't affect the cave light ambiance. And my heart started pounding because it sounded exactly as if the glass on that door had been shattered by someone breaking in. I got my brother on the phone and had him FaceTime with me while I crept out onto the pirate course to see what had happened. For some reason, I didn't think to turn on the big overhead floodlights, so I walked onto the course while it was dimly lit with stage lights. Lots of red and purple gels on everything. The perfect lighting for investigating a break-in. Or spooks. Needless to say, I was terrified as I crept across the putting greens, especially the ones that had dummies of murderous pirates, ghost pirates, and fish monsters. I can't imagine how scared I'd have been without my brother on the phone. There was no one else on the course, and the back door that I thought had been smashed in appeared to be intact. I instantly felt both relieved and foolish, and turned my phone around so that my brother and I were speaking face to face. I was surprised that he didn't take this opportunity to make fun of me for being a scaredy cat. Instead, he told me to finish up as fast as possible, and to call him back when I got to my car. So I switched off all of the lights and the pumps to our indoor water features, and locked up. It was funny. Even though I was still relieved that nothing had happened, I couldn't shake an eerie feeling, almost like a faint sensation of raspy breathing on the back of my neck. It made me jump once or twice, I'm not gonna lie. I finally got everything locked up and went out to my car to call my brother back, as I'd promised. He was acting kind of funny on the phone. He said, "Listen, I didn't want to scare you back there, but I did see something." I asked him what he meant, and he said that when we were FaceTiming and I turned my phone around, he could see a figure off in the distance, hanging by the neck from a rope. He said it was the silhouette of a girl, backlit by a blood-red floodlight. Fun fact, After speaking to him, I figured he must have seen this figure somewhere on the 12th or 13th hole. There's no red lighting on that part of the course. I said, "Oh my God, let me hang up and call the cops." And he was like, "I think you're a little late for that. That was just Nancy. We've all seen her. She was hanged at the end of the Civil War." Apparently, everyone else in my family, including all the other workers at Forbidden Island Mini Golf, had encountered Nancy's ghost, and nobody thought to tell me about it. Typical. I'm always the last person to find out about anything in this family.
A trip to the amusement park has its own perils and horrors. Here are a few testimonials we found online. The place names and certain other details have been changed to avoid upsetting any litigious cartoon rodents or waterfowl. Friend of the show, Autumn Grube, from the podcast Autumn's Oddities, is also on hand to help me narrate a few of them. I'm a former theme park worker. I was working the Spook Walk, our walk-through haunted house attraction, and about 20 minutes before closing, this really creepy guy showed up and asked to go in. And I said, yeah. He had a really glazed look to his eyes, and he was wearing a red and white striped shirt and overalls, and spoke in a really high-pitched falsetto. Well, 20 minutes later, he hadn't exited the haunted house yet, and it usually took about 5 minutes to walk through it. At the end of my shift, I had to go in and walk through the haunted house by myself, which already is really scary for me, but made even scarier because I knew the guy was still in there. I decided to suck it up, and I walked in trying to be confident. But only about a quarter of the way through, I heard him talking to himself up ahead in a really creepy voice, saying stuff like,
"It's scary. No, it's not."
I was freaked out and turned around and ran out and got my manager and asked him to walk through the haunted house for me. In that time, the guy must have left because when me and my manager walked through, he was gone. And I have no idea how he managed to get out of there without either of us seeing him.
2. The hypercritical one writes, "Well, at my park, we had these duck-themed paddle boats. The late-night shifts made this particularly scary. Anyways, I was working the ducks and, tied up all the boats and went to clock out, but I forgot the ride register, so I went back to get it. And when I got there, 2 of the boats had drifted out into the middle of the lake. I figured it was just that I fucked up the knots. So I had to get my manager so that he could use the motorboat to go and get them. But he just looked at me dead on and said in a very serious tone, 'Leave them alone.' The next day, those 2 boats were gone and replaced with a couple of spares we had. Now, these things were big, like the same length as a Mini Cooper, and wider, much wider. They were built to hold 2 adults if necessary, and they were just gone. They weren't even kept in the back with the other spares. They were just gone. When I think back to it, I'm certain that I tied them properly because I had thought that if I didn't and they drifted, that I'd get in trouble. I got to talking about it to some of my coworkers one afternoon, while we were backstage waiting for a thunderstorm to pass, and they said that it was probably the ghost. Apparently, there's this old story about this kid who drowned in the lake years ago, and his ghost goes around collecting shit and piling it up on the bottom of the lake near the location of his body, which, according to the story, was never recovered. This one girl I worked with said that she knew a guy who was working at the park when a diver went down to the bottom of the lake to do some kind of repair on a fountain pump. He said the diver found what looked like a giant underwater shrine made up of all the shit that disappeared in and around the lake. And I bet that that's where those paddle boats ended up.
Ghost or no ghost, I kind of get it, says Roku Daime Hokage. The idea of something that big and mechanical, especially if you have submechanophobia, just vanishing into the water below is unnerving. Submechanophobia, by the way, is the fear of submerged or partially submerged man-made objects. Kind of like the bomb shark animatronic that jumps out at you at Super Nutso Land. That thing has given me nightmares since this one 4th of July when I was like 6 or 7. According to Root KRP, this next story happened at an amusement park that we'll call Mega Magic Land. While stocking up one of the carts from inside an unused empty location, I had an unexplainable experience. The location I was in used to be a pizzeria, Izza da Pizza, near the Scrambler if you're familiar with the park. It's empty and void of life and only gets used occasionally for maybe something like training. The tables that were used for the restaurant were stacked upside down on top of the tables. The tables were heavy, with concrete tabletops that would take 2 guys to move them. And upon entering the location and beginning my inventory, I felt uneasy and just chalked it up to being tired and creeped out because it was late. To get to the stockroom, you have to pass by the dining area with the tables, and I did so without incident. After counting our overpriced ice creams, I turned around to head out the way I came and locked up. What met me as I turned around the dark corner freaked me out. Right there, blocking my exit, were 3 tables sitting right side up and lined up, obstructing my path. I called out if anyone was there and was met with silence. I simply turned around and ran to the back entrance and left the building from there. Afterwards, I explained to a coworker how I was alone up there and heard absolutely no one, and how the heavy-as-hell tables got moved and flipped so swiftly and silently. I was then later told that years ago, a little boy with a heart condition ran all the way up the hill, racing his friends, and essentially dropped dead right in front of that restaurant, probably 10 feet from where my incident had occurred. I hate closing at night now.
One-Way Man is supposedly a ghost that sits next to single riders on Galactic Pony Express, which is an indoor dark ride roller coaster in Super Nutso Land, and this is according to Untimely Lord. He will seem like a regular single rider that sits next to you, may even have talked with you in line, but at the end of the ride, after the photo flash, there will be no one sitting next to you.
I've been on that ride with him before, says Snoo61913. As a child, maybe 12 years old, he talked to you. He looked clean-cut, red hair, looked similar to the main guy in Band of Brothers, and looked like a guy from the 60s. I was at Nutso Land by myself. This was in 2002. My sister had a cheerleading competition that I didn't want to go to, so my dad got me a 3-day Nutso ticket. I actually talked to One-Way Man. I told him I was by myself, and it's hard to get around the park when you forgot your glasses. I don't remember what else we talked about. I just remember him being very nice. Going through that part where they take the ride picture, I looked over and screamed at him, "This is fun, right?" I looked next to me, and he was gone. We hadn't even gotten off the ride yet. I didn't think that he might be a ghost until someone told me the story of One-Way Man.
Star DoorDash writes, I've heard of that ghost, but the way I heard it, he was called the Faceless Mechanic. When they were first premiering Galactic Pony Express, back when the ride was still called Space Patrol Star Racers, there was a maintenance worker working on the tracks. A cast member came in and, not knowing there was a maintenance worker on the tracks, started a test run of the ride.
Space Patrol Star Racers and Galactic Pony Express still has tracks that have no maintenance tunnels or alcoves on the side of the tracks. In other words, if you get caught on those tracks, and there are about a mile of tracks, you have nowhere to go to avoid the ride vehicle. By the time the coaster got back to the station, it had dragged the maintenance worker through the entire ride, face down, killing him. They say that his ghost haunts the Galactic Pony Express to this day as the Faceless Mechanic. Cast members say they see a guy in an old mechanic's uniform walking through the attraction, but when they try to see his face, it's just a shadow. Frightened guests have ridden this attraction as a single rider and said during the ride, a faceless Nutso-Land cast member in an old uniform appeared beside them, disappearing only when they got back to the main terminal. The Faceless Mechanic is the scariest of the Nutso Park ghost stories, and there are a bunch of them out there. TacoCat042 says that Hamburger Park is supposedly haunted by, I think, 3 spirits or something. I've only seen one of the things. A worker who wanted to start his own amusement park died of cancer and couldn't accomplish his dream, sadly. But he worked at a ride called the Wild Banshee. And when I worked there, one day the ride legit started up on its own and just went on through. It was super freaky, and apparently it does that a lot. I only saw it once, though. Mind you, it's really not possible to do without someone there to actually turn it on. So, yeah.
I heard that the ghost of Marlo Laffler, the founder of the Hamburger's restaurant chain and of Hamburger Park, tends to appear a lot of places like the Grand Hamburger Hotel. I used to bartend up at the hotel, and a common story was that Marlo would show up at the Bingo Lounge, which used to be a cigar lounge but is now a bar, and have a nice smoke. On some nights you can still smell the cigars. There's another ride called the Fugue Fries Adventure. So apparently there's a hockey player that haunts that ride, although I never saw it. But security guards swear that every now and then, on security footage, they can see a figure. People claim that the ride starts on its own as well, and some have said they heard a man's voice.
Thorax Kicks Ass used to work at a janky old amusement park in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. We liked to hang out in the parking lot after work and all talk. The place was haunted as fuck. We watched many a ride start up with no one around and then suddenly shut off. We watched the Bearcat coaster turn on suddenly and climb the hill halfway. From our spot, we could see the ride operations booth was empty, and it was way after hours, and no one but us and the park security was there. I also believed there were transients living in the park that would come out at night. It was the best job I ever had, but it was still spooky. The only ghostly thing that has happened to me at any of the Nutso parks is the little boy that haunts Lil Wonder World. Cast members and guests say they've seen a little boy riding solo on the ride and has even been seen on security cameras. The little boy likes to turn off the lights and even bring the attraction to a stop. I remember when I was a cast member once dealing with the attraction when the ride came to a sudden halt. We couldn't find or figure out why it had happened, and having to help guests off the boats and exit the attraction, I just kept thinking it was that poor little boy.
Ex-ride operator from Monogram Studio Park here. There's a couple stories depending on the area of the park, but Camp Critter Creek is haunted by a little girl named Molly who died in a fire. She would turn on and off the rides even though the keys were moved, unlike the doors of one of the rides. And on one occasion, I was walking away from the kids coaster and saw a little girl running towards it at closing time. I yelled for her, telling her it was closed, but she ran up the stairs and I saw her enter the main dock as well. You can get in trouble for that, but as I got closer, I realized there's no little girl. Anyone can say what they want, but Molly is present. She mostly likes to hang out by the Ferris wheel and in the waterfall area and the rock formations in and around it. After closing a ride, I'd say goodnight to Molly and tell her I'm turning off the lights and the ride to make sure she doesn't turn them back on again.
Dexter Grant writes, "This story made the rounds with the interns in the college program at Nutso Country, USA, way back in the early 80s. I can't tell if it had any basis in fact or not. The story goes that one night on the T-Rex mine train, which is a cross between a dark ride and a train that does a slow circuit around all the attractions in Prehistoric Village, a teenager tried to climb from car to car. He slipped and fell and was dragged under the car behind him. As he was pulled under, he grabbed his girlfriend's long hair. As you went through the tunnel, girls with long hair would feel their hair being pulled by his frantic ghost. I felt it myself."
Finally, Jane Bananas says, "I just met a cast member last night who worked backstage security for 7 years, mostly in the evenings and through the night at Good Times Adventure Park. She heard this incident over the radio. A custodial member called over the radio asking for security because he heard a small boy, maybe around 5 years old, yelling, 'Daddy, Daddy.' They never found a child. Sometime later, not sure if it was the same day or some time had passed, the cast member I spoke to said she was in a parking structure and heard a little boy yelling, 'Daddy, Daddy.' She heard someone else call it over the radio, and then a security team was driving up and down the parking structure looking for a child, but they never found anything." I thought it would be a gas to do a lightning round of me reading some true horror stories about creepy churches, culled from the most rancid recesses of Reddit. Haunted Church by Reddit user Crisco3180. My dad was a pastor at a church for 4 years. Many people had died in this church before we got there. Over the course of these 4 years, some of the craziest, most unexplainable stuff had happened. I'm here to tell you all a few of the best ones. My parents went to Maine every year. I'd gotten tired of the trip and decided to stay home. I went over to the church to grab some snacks from the back of the old sanctuary. There were 2 sanctuaries. One was about 90 years old, and the newer one was about 50 years old. I went to the back of it, where the snack booth was. Mind you, this was the middle of the day, so it was completely lit up through the old stained glass windows. I bent down to grab some drinks from the mini fridge under the counter, and when I got back up and turned to walk out the door, I saw this figure standing in the doorway. No eyes, no mouth, no nose, no ears. Just a bald head wearing a long, dark robe. As soon as I saw it, I vanished like that. Safe to say, I ran out of there as fast as humanly possible. This same church had a preschool in it. They would change the toys out in the classes every now and then so the kids wouldn't get bored of the old ones. One time, the teacher took one of the kids upstairs to help her pick out some toys for the rest of the class. These old classes upstairs were used for storage of preschool toys, extra chairs, old desks at the time, so there was no one else up there except them. When the teacher was grabbing some toys, the kid she'd brought up to help said, "Hey, look at those kids playing with those toys over there." Of course, when the teacher looked around, there was no one. Church is Haunted. Pastor Thinks We're Crazy by Reddit user Winter Sage, spelled W1NT3R_S4G3. Years ago, I was forced to go to a church event, and we all had a terrifying experience. The setup was this. Boys slept anywhere they wanted downstairs, and the girls slept wherever they wanted upstairs. except some rooms were locked off because the church was being renovated. Anyway, it didn't matter too much as we were just a small group. Night rolls around and us girls migrated into the nursery, and most of the guys just crashed in the small indoor gym/basketball court. Only one guy couldn't sleep. Above the basketball court are windows to another room that was locked off, and one of the guys kept seeing flashing lights and the silhouettes of people looking down on him. He didn't stay in the gym long. Around the same time, myself and the other girls were playing apples to apples in the nursery. The door was closed, and next to it was a one-way window. Inside was like a mirror. It was so kids didn't see their parents coming back to check on them and make a fuss. Well, I started hearing banging and scratching on the door. I freaked and looked up to see two grinning faces staring back at all of us. Remember, we're on the mirror side, so one of us bolted toward the door, and we hear stomping down the hall, but no one was there. Pastor came up, screaming at us and saying we were all just imagining it, but we know what we saw and heard, and all of us refused to go back. Janitor at Haunted Church. There are a number of tales on Reddit about people cleaning haunted churches. Reddit user Mayberry101 writes, "My dad used to be a janitor for our old church. One night we decided to go in pretty late, around 10 p.m. Mind you, the church was enormous. Long story short, we had just finished cleaning all the downstairs bathrooms when all of a sudden the gym doors opened super loudly. We freaked out so bad because no one, other than the pastor, had access to the church. We had to deactivate the alarm to get in, and we would reactivate it once inside just to be safe. We finished up the last few things we had to do and left super fast. The next morning, we told one of our family friends, who would sometimes do us the favor of going in to clean whenever we couldn't make it, and he told us he experienced that very same thing, alongside lots of other creepy stuff. He never told us because he feared that we wouldn't believe him. It was truly scary. Reddit user Agent Skidmarks replied to this story saying, "My mom used to work for a custodial company that cleaned churches. They're all haunted. Well, most of them at least. Within the first month or so, she had an experience and she called up her boss to tell her what happened. Her boss just said, 'I was wondering how long it would take you to experience something.' Then Reddit user Mrs_Mop replied to this reply saying, 'I can second this. My mom runs a cleaning company. The church she cleans was haunted as well. The girls' toilets had the most activity. I'd always say hello whenever I walked in, when I was alone. Someone even spoke to my dad from the girls' toilets, and my poor dad, who had no idea there was no one in there, was chatting back until my mom asked who he was talking to, and she explained nobody else was in the building.' I saw something in my church as a kid by Reddit user RinkyDink3. When I was around the age of 6, my mom started to clean our church every week to help out. During this time, we were renting a farmhouse where me and my 2 older brothers experienced quite a few paranormal events, but my parents never gave it the light of day due to them being very Christian and very conservative. One day my mom was cleaning the church and my brothers and I tagged along since my dad was working. While Mom cleaned, we decided to play hide and seek, since the church was empty. Eventually, I was the seeker looking for my brother, and I remember walking down a long hallway. Since the church was closed and my mom was just cleaning the room where the sermons were held, all the other lights were off except for emergency lights. When I was walking in the very dim hall, for some reason I felt the need to look up, and from that moment I can't get the image of what I saw out of my head. There was an all-black figure around the size of a 6 or 7-year-old. The figure was crawling on the ceiling. So I was looking at its back, only it had noticed me. So it had twisted its head all the way around to see me. The face was blurry because it was dark, but I could make out an almost cartoonish smile staring at me, and I remember its eyes being not human-like at all. The weird thing about this is, despite how creepy I remember the figure being, my 6-year-old self was not scared at all. I remember thinking to myself, how did my brother get up there? Then I felt the need to leave the hallway. When I saw its face, I didn't feel my stomach drop, nor did I feel scared or threatened. It just felt like whatever I saw wanted me to just move along. To this day, I don't have any idea what it was. My brothers called me crazy and said, there can't be any demons in a church, since it's protected by God. And my parents agreed. The older I get, the more I wonder if it was just a dream that made itself a memory. I don't really remember any other times we played hide and seek, but this one really sticks out. Here's one about a haunted Bible college from a deleted Reddit user. I went to a private Christian university. It used to be an old mall complex in the 70s. And if I remember right, there'd been at least a couple deaths prior to it becoming a university. The dorms were an old hotel. There'd be unexplained faces appearing in photos, doors slamming, beds shaking, voices. There were 2 specific dorm rooms where, if you slept in them, you might wake up with scratches all over your body. Somehow, I became the one that people would come to whenever they had one of these weird experiences. I guess I didn't try to gaslight them into thinking they'd imagined it, like the administration did. Everyone had a huge sense that there was darkness hanging over the administration for years. Then, lo and behold, the university president was outed for doing some real shady shit. A couple years later, he left. And if you visit the campus now, it feels like a completely different place. Lakeside Baptism by Reddit user Queen Note Spelling. This didn't happen directly to us, but it was a story we were told at an evening devotional service. The guy telling it swears it happened, but I'm not interested in if it happened or not, just that they thought it was appropriate as an example. The guy telling it swears it happened. This is how I remember it going. Pastor was leading baptism/worship services down at the lake. A young woman was standing in the lake ready to be baptized. The pastor asks her if she wants to be close to God. She says yes. Then he asks her, how much does she want to be close to God? And she's not sure how to answer. And then he asks if she's ready to get baptized. So she says yes. And the pastor dunks her into the water and puts his hands on her head. And then he doesn't let her back up. He holds her under the water until she's flailing and panicking for air. He doesn't let her up until she starts struggling for air. And the moral is, if you want Jesus as much as you wanted air just now, you're on the right path. I was thinking about it again recently and just realized how fucked up that was to tell a bunch of 10 to 12-year-old kids, not to mention if it was actually true. The girl in the story, if she didn't drown, could have died later from secondary drowning.
Don't let anyone tell you there's no such thing as ghosts. They're real, and they're all around us. But maybe they're not quite what we think they are. This thing that happened to me, gosh, it had to be 20 years ago, probably more. Back before streaming services and before everyone had a digital camera in their pockets. I was an undergrad, and I had convinced myself that I wanted to get an MFA in film. So I tried to get jobs at movie theaters and video rental stores during breaks as a way to build up a resume for a budding career in film that never got off the ground. There were a half dozen video stores in town, a Blockbuster, a crappy shop inside the food country, and 2 or 3 mom and pops. I got a gig as a clerk for Interstate Video, right next to the old Big Lots in my town. Now this store had a videography side business, which meant they'd go and videotape your wedding, graduation, bar mitzvah, whatever, and give you a professionally edited video of it. I told my boss about my film school aspirations and talked my way into a side gig as a junior videographer. It was fun work, but I had to attend so many goddamn weddings. I can't tell you how many times I filmed a bride dancing with her father to Butterfly Kisses. Gross. My job was basically shoot B-roll. My partner, an older guy named Donnie, he was the senior videographer. He shot all the A-list footage and then edited the tapes from our 2 cameras together in the back room at Interstate Video. And so this fucked up thing happened at a wedding we videotaped one August. The wedding ceremony was held at this Lutheran church on the edge of town. It was funny, it felt like we were far out in the country, out in the middle of nowhere. But we were, in fact, just 1 block over from the town's busy historic Main Street. A street festival was in full swing. Tourists were everywhere and the streets were clogged with pedicabs giving sightseers tours. But you'd never be able to tell from the wedding venue. It was a beautiful church, especially compared to some of those podunk old churches we usually covered, or that one wedding we did inside the bingo hall. The church was on a lot adjacent to a historical site, a Civil War battlefield or something. They had converted it to a memorial park with a big pavilion on it. So when the ceremony was over, everyone just walked over to the pavilion for the reception. Oh, so where was I? Oh yeah, beautiful church. So whenever I shot video, I take every opportunity to show off my skills, in case Donnie would notice during editing. I love the films of Mario Bava. And, God, this is nerdy. Bava would do this thing where he'd zoom into an object that catches the light, like a candle, a flame, or chandelier, and then dial down the focus until the light becomes fuzzy, abstract shapes before dissolving to the next shot. And I was messing around with the camera's manual zoom and manual focus before the ceremony. I was trying to replicate Bava's zoom dissolve effect on a stained glass window that was backlit by the sunlight and glowing really nicely. In the process of doing that, I noticed 2 things. The first was some fancy old English lettering on the back wall of the sanctuary. It said, "I am the way and the truth and the life." Except the lettering they used was so ornate that the word truth looked more like truck. And this cracked me up until I noticed that second thing. It was a very thin person, all dressed in orange from head to toe, with a hood pulled down to cover most of their face. Whatever they were wearing, it was loose and baggy on them, and it resembled a ceremonial robe, or a shroud. At first I thought it was someone very old because of their, I guess, hunched over posture. And although I couldn't see this person's eyes, I could still tell that they were staring at me. It was creepy. And then Donnie tapped me on the shoulder and we started setting up our shots for the ceremony, and I forgot all about it. So the beautiful wedding was beautiful. Truly. It was maybe the nicest, sweetest wedding I'd ever shot. The reception was cool too. The groom and his mom danced to a Rainbow Connection, which was really cute. The bride, who looked positively luminous, and her father danced to What a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong. A refreshing change from Butterfly Kisses. The wedding cake was lemon chiffon, the groom's cake was red velvet, and decorated to look like a giant Reuben. I stole a piece of both. Both were delicious. It was right at sunset, and the reception started winding down so that everyone could throw birdseed at the bride and groom as they rode off into the sunset. Now, I'd shot a lot of weddings and seen newlyweds drive off in limos, stretch limos, party buses, horse-drawn carriages, classic cars, a fire truck, and once even a canary yellow monster truck called Big Skillet. But this couple, they drove off in one of those pedicabs from the main street. They're also called cycle rickshaws, but pedicab sounds less cringe. If you've never seen one of these, it's just an open-top carriage or a wagon, usually big enough to hold 2 people on a bench seat. And it's pulled by a bicycle. This particular one could hold 4 passengers facing each other. Now this presented a technical challenge for us, because they wanted us to video their pedicab ride down Main Street, which was, as you will recall, only a block over. Even though it was a 4-seater, it was too tight for 4 people, plus bulky camera and equipment. So Donnie told me to stay behind and shoot the departure from outside the pedicab, and he'd shoot from the inside. This was all cool to me because that meant I could hang back, pack up our gear, and maybe scavenge some cake and some of those little bite-sized ham biscuits. Pedicab wasn't gone for more than 5 minutes, and the wedding guests left behind started to thin out. I remember I was alone and hauling gear on the shaded pathway between the pavilion and the church. And then, I can't explain it. It was like a wind swept its way towards me, but not a wind of air. A wind made of nervous energy and dread. None of the wedding guests were near me, but after a while it seemed that they had all started to murmur and then pack closer to one another, and then they were all around me. And before I knew it, I had moved as part of the crowd of wedding guests like a driftwood on an ocean wave, and then we were on the sidewalk on the main street amidst a lot of shouting and weeping, and somewhere a little ways off groans of people in pain, and now the fire and rescue vehicles were arriving, and with them the horror of shrieking sirens and a confusion of objects lit up in alternating red and blue lights, now bodies being pulled from twisted metal and pavement and stretched onto gurneys and pushed into an ambulance. So, what happened was this. Bride and groom's pedicab left the venue and pulled into the main street. I don't know who was at fault. That's been hotly discussed in the civil suits that follow, but whatever. A large pickup truck, a Ford F-150 or something like that, swerved out of his lane and struck the pedicab from behind. The truck wasn't even going fast, but it didn't need to be. The driver of the truck would later say in his deposition that he'd swerved to avoid hitting a pedestrian in a University of Tennessee hoodie. No one was able to back that statement up, though. From what I understand, the passengers were all catapulted out of the cab. Donnie and our camera equipment were tossed onto the pavement. It destroyed his leg. I'm not sure how many surgeries and pins and plates he needed to put his leg back together, but Donnie walks with a pronounced limp to this day. Pedicab driver got off easier with a broken collarbone and some bumps and scrapes. The bride and groom weren't so lucky. People who'd been there to see the accident happen said that those two went sailing through the air. The groom struck his head on a parking meter. He would be pronounced dead an hour or two later after being med-flighted to a head trauma unit. The bride landed on a parked Volkswagen and suffered a fair amount of damage to her spine and broke about every bone on one side of her face. I mean, what can I say? It was a horrible tragedy. I spent the rest of the evening feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. I made it back to the wedding venue with the rest of the wedding guests. I remember there was a lot of sobbing, but I had a very particular problem on my hands. I was stuck there. Donnie had been my ride to the wedding, but he was being rushed to the ER, presumably with the keys in his pocket. I had to call my dad to pick me up, and I was the last one to leave. So I had a lot of time to contemplate mortality and fate and the whole Megillah while sitting on the steps of a church that became creepier and creepier as the sun sank beneath the horizon. Over the remainder of the summer, interstate video became lawsuit central. It seemed like every day someone new came in asking questions about the accident. Many of them came in requesting copies of Donnie's video. Yeah, I forgot to mention that in addition to Donnie's leg, all of our camera equipment got destroyed. The camera Donnie was using to shoot the pedicab ride got broken into a dozen little pieces, but somehow the SVHS tape he'd been recording on was undamaged and had recorded the whole accident. Lawyers for the truck driver wanted to examine the video to try and locate the person in the UT hoodie that the truck had swerved to miss. And representatives from the bride's family, the deceased groom's family, and even the pedicab company came for their own copies of it. I remember Donnie came to the store one day. He was in a wheelchair and went into the back room where he played the tape of the accident for our boss and another of my coworkers who had swung by to pick up her paycheck. I left the room and stood behind the front counter because I couldn't bear to watch it. I could still hear it though. The screaming, the sounds of the people moaning in pain. It was like listening to a snuff film. I guess in a way it was a snuff film. Well, the summer ended and I left town with my fall semester starting back up. When I came back home for winter break, I pulled a few shifts at Interstate Video because they needed seasonal help and I needed some cash. One day, it must have been between Christmas and New Year's, I opened up the store and I saw that Donnie had left a note for me saying that someone would be by to pick up a wedding video that he'd left behind the counter. Donnie didn't say the video was from the truck crash wedding, as people around the video store began calling it. But when I saw the person coming to get it, I knew what she was coming for. It was the bride from the accident, though she was unrecognizable. Her face was badly scarred and malformed on one side. Her posture was stooped and twisted, and she was struggling to walk with a tripod cane. She was having such a difficult time walking that I wondered how in the world was she walking around alone without someone to help her. She was wearing an orange hooded sweatshirt from her alma mater, the University of Tennessee, and matching orange sweatpants. But she lost a lot of weight, and her clothes were hanging from her twisted frame, almost like ceremonial robes or an orange shroud. I know you won't believe me, but I swear in the name of Jesus that she was the same figure in orange I had seen when I was looking at that funny writing on the wall at her wedding. The writing that I thought had said, "I am the way and the truck and the life." The vacant expression in her eyes as she stared at me from beneath the orange hood, the way she stooped and hobbled about, the loose drape of her clothes, it was her. What I had seen at the wedding was the same broken woman, and how was that possible? We didn't really speak much, only saying what was necessary to hand over the videotape that she'd come by to pick up. And then she was gone. But I swear to Christ I've seen her before. Had I had a premonition of the accident while we were setting up for the wedding? And what about the guy who'd crashed the truck into the pedicab? He said he'd swerved to miss a pedestrian in an orange University of Tennessee hoodie. I rushed into the back room where Donnie edited videos and rummaged around until I found the tape of the accident. I slid it into one of the store's super VHS editing decks and queued it up to the accident. Donnie had captured the moment the truck made impact. It was hard to make out any details, especially among the crowds on the main street, because as soon as the truck hit, the camera went flying. I ran it back and replayed it several times, until finally, at the edge of the frame, I saw, or thought I saw, a twisted blur of a thin woman in a baggy orange hoodie.
Ren fairs are not without their horror stories. We've gathered a few of them from the darkest corners of the internet. Some we've had to modify or mash up to protect anonymity and other sensitive information.
A deleted user posted this. A guy I knew fell onto the blacksmith's fire and basically melted his arm because an owl the falconer couldn't control swooped at his hair and tried to rip it off. Then, Maybe Heart of Gold replied, a very similar incident happened at an Arizona Ren fair. Guy fainted from the outdoor temperature plus lack of good air. Said he woke up just in time to see his hand grow skinny and fingers curl away. He's stable now, but he's already lost his entire forearm and might lose more if they can't stay ahead of the damage to his humerus. Rural Ren Fair Farmhouse Madness from a true haunting incident by High on the Mountaintop. Every time I think about this encounter, it still breaks my brain and gives me chills. I'm convinced I'm not misremembering childhood events, and after all these years, it's still unexplainable. When I was 7 or 8 years old, my best friend April and I spent all of our free time playing together on her family's farm in the middle of nowhere. There was a barn with an upstairs loft where we'd spend hours and hours playing make-believe and creating stories about our fantasy kingdom that would be played out for weeks on end. This loft was mostly just storage for boxes and spare furniture and other old junk. There was a small wooden chair in the corner of the loft. One day, April and I are playing in the barn. We were both sitting in the front part of the loft, with our legs dangling over the edge of the wooden loft, which was about 10 feet off the ground. Our backs were turned to that old chair. At some point, we noticed some movement over our shoulders. We turned and saw a little girl about our age with large, thick, square glasses and dressed in a very neat little dress, like an old-timey Little House on the Prairie dress. But aside from the thick glasses and the antique style of dress, she looked exactly like me. She was just sitting in the chair, looking at us. I was totally creeped out and asked April, "Who is that girl in the chair?" April immediately panics and jumps up so quickly that she almost falls out of the loft. Well, this caused me to panic as well, and we both bolted out of the loft and hauled ass out of the barn. We were so young that we couldn't even comprehend what had just happened. We just accepted it and moved on. Didn't ever tell any adults about it, as I recall. However, we never went back in that barn. We had to convince ourselves that it was just a trick of the mind in order to sleep at night. Fast forward to my freshman year of college. April's family had sold their farm around the time we'd graduated high school, and now the new owners leased the land to the local Ren Fair, and we thought it'd be a kick to get dressed up and check it out. April went as a fairy, and I went as my D&D character, who is a dragonborn sorceress. This particular fair was primarily made up of tents, with some wood plank stages here and there. But they kept the old barn standing and used it as the location for a little petting zoo area. Not surprisingly, me and April stayed clear of that place. It was like an unspoken agreement between the two of us that we were still afraid we might see a creepy Little House on the Prairie girl who looked like me. We had a fun time. This is an annual Ren Fair, and it's done very well for its size. But the whole time I was there, I felt like I was being watched or followed. But I managed to shake it off. But we did go to get some cone bread, which was in a tent diagonally across from the petting zoo thing. As I was picking up our cone breads and a couple of beers, I happened to glance in the direction of the barn. I saw a dark figure standing there with goats and sheep, walking all around her as if they didn't see her. She was wearing a costume that was exactly like mine. Not just similar, but an exact copy. And I'd made this costume by hand, with some very specific details related to my character added to it. And with the exception of a pair of thick square glasses, she looked just like me. I dropped our food and made a sort of frightened noise. April heard me, and when she looked at me, I pointed. April stood up and said, "I see her!" April had had a beer and some mead, so I think she was buzzed and full of liquid courage. She started marching over to the woman, who I guess was the little girl in the barn, except she'd aged as many years as me. And April marched in her direction as if to say, "What the fuck?" But then a large group of people passed between April and the petting zoo barn. And after those people had passed, my doppelganger was gone. April and I both still vividly remember the image of the girl in the chair, and then to have an almost identical experience years later at the Ren Fair, it boggles the mind. I know we both saw the same thing, and I know it was real. I have no explanation. I guess it was a ghost or spirit? But why did it have my face? Was it a mimic? What kind of spirit was she? And why did we encounter her twice, almost 2 decades apart? This one comes from Drunk Pronto Pup. I was at the Ren Fair when a man bypassed a fence to climb a rock wall near the King's Gate area of the festival before falling about 50 feet off the other side. Dude landed 10 feet from my daughter and I. 2 men ran to him, one from my left, one from my right. They reached for his shoulders to sit him up, and I put the fear of God into them with my yelling, "Do not touch him!" He was breathing slowly, gradually slower. He obviously had a pulse, but he was fading. I maintained his C-spine and screamed in his ear in an effort to keep him conscious until the rig showed up. The fall was absolutely an accident. Seemed he tried to take a shortcut through the woods, obviously unaware the woods ended very abruptly. There are no lights to help a person navigate at night. I smelled no alcohol on him, but that doesn't mean he was sober. He was in rough shape with one hell of a raspberry on his head, and one of his legs was definitely broken above the knee. I don't remember which one. If you ever find someone after a fall, do not move them unless you know how to do so without compromising their condition further. Going Higher, adapted from a true encounter posted by Netflix and Bean. I was 17 and a friend invited me to go with her family to a campground where they were having a very small, very local Ren fair. It was around the 4th of July, so they had fireworks, a drum corps, and all the usual Ren fair stuff. But they tried to make it a lot more patriotic. Lots of red, white, and blue color schemes on the wench dresses, etc. I even saw a guy dressed as a Captain America themed knight. It was actually really cool. But we were young and dumb and decided to sneak off and get into trouble. The fair stayed open late, well after dark, for fireworks. We went to a part of the campground that wasn't technically a part of the Ren Fair, but we found this private shower area, I guess for people who booked a campsite to use, and decided it'd be a good place to smoke a bowl. I remember we turned on the shower thinking the steam would help cover up the smell of weed, or whatever. We could hear all the crowds and the popping of the fireworks off in the distance, but where we were, there was nobody around. We didn't want to go back too quickly because we were afraid my friend's parents would sniff us out. So we decided to hang out on the swing set, a playground adjacent to the shower shed, or whatever it's called. Our backs were to the trees and it was dark as back in there. So we sat on 2 swings, all dressed up like fairies, with 2 empty swings next to us. We were chatting, listening to the fireworks that we couldn't really see, when we both snapped our heads to the side at the same moment. One of the empty swings was swinging. The air was dead-ass still with no breeze. I know what you're thinking. We probably caused it to swing with our own movement. No, it wasn't a gentle swinging motion. It was gathering speed, as if there was a little kid in it, wanting to go higher, 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 before jumping off. Well, we flew off that swing set and back down the hill to the fairgrounds. Several years later, me and this same friend worked a season at the same Ren Fair, which had gotten much bigger since in the years I was in high school. One day we were at the tavern. It was a rainy day, so not many people showed up, and we were shooting the shit with a vendor who'd worked the fair for a long time. We told her the story about what we'd seen on the swing. In all the years since, we'd just convinced ourselves we were stoned out of our brains and might have hallucinated it or something. But our friend said the campground was very haunted by ghosts from Civil War times. In particular, there's a little girl ghost named Edith who likes to haunt all the playgrounds and children's play areas on the property. Apparently, anyone who works the kiddie attractions at the Ren Fair are instructed to say good morning and good night to Edith whenever they're setting up or breaking down for the day. Otherwise, Edith will make sure bad things happen to them. At our first Ren Fest ever, our 3-year-old son needed to pee, so I took him to a porta potty because I needed to pee too. I pee, then go to stand him up to pee as well, and he starts peeing. However, he isn't just peeing. He's also shooting straight diarrhea onto my brand new Ren Fair dress I just bought earlier that day. Luckily, I was wearing 3 skirts layered on top of each other, and it only got on the top 2 layers. Still, that's fucking nasty. I'd throw it all out, guys. I would. This one was adapted from a true story submitted by Scary TJ. went to the local Ren Fair in the summer of 2019, and I was dressed up as a ring wraith from the Lord of the Rings movie. Looked scary as shit and liked to walk up and down the fair trying to scare all the little kids. Yes, I know I'm an evil but hey, it's fun and I'm an asshole. Well, I'm glad he pointed that out so that I didn't have to. Anyways, karma got me back, so don't worry. I went up to the kids' straw pit looking to see who I could make piss their pants. It was getting dark and most of the people had cleared out to see the last joust, so not many people up there. The straw pit was on the top of a hill, and from there, I could see a tree in the woods just behind a row of closed vendor booths. There was a dark figure hanging from the tree. Now, I just thought there was some kind of spooky, cool Ren Fair performance or something. So I ran down the hill, almost tripped on my costume. To get a closer look, it was a woman hanging from the tree. She was wearing a white dress and had long black hair. It was sunset, so the jousting field would have been lit up bright orange by the setting sun. But back here, it was almost pitch black with all the tree coverage. And remember, all the booths had closed up in this area and everybody else was at the joust. So I thought it was strange there was just one performer doing this hanging routine. But still, when I got closer, the woman in the tree snapped her head up to look at me. She pointed her finger at me and said, 13 days. Just like the little fucking girl in The Grudge. I think he means The Ring. I started clapping and told her good job, very convincing, and turned to walk away. I walked back up the hill and turned around. She was gone. And if she was a performer, like one of the acrobats or something, there was no way she could have gotten down from that tree without me seeing, especially the way she must have been harnessed up to that tree. But even then, it didn't occur to me that this might be a spiritual phenomenon. Then 13 days later, right at sundown, my grandfather was driving home from Walmart, got hit by a landscaping truck, and died on the scene. Damn.
Of course, there's plenty of horror stories to be told from the restaurant industry, and many of them are true. What follows are some macabre morsels I found stewing in the kitchen of that greasy spoon diner we call Reddit. As I did on our Haunted Churches episode, these tales will be narrated more or less as they're written. It came from Reddit. Culinary Creeps. Narrated by Edward October, with Amber Jourdan, co-host of Witches Talking Tarot. Let's whet our appetites with some ghost stories. Reddit user Alron's Girl writes, I worked in a haunted restaurant for years. We even had paranormal investigators come in. But if there were no customers, we'd hear silverware clinking and hushed whispers. After the bar would close for the night, there were a few times when we saw someone walk by the window between the bar and dining room. One time, the waitress and I grabbed our meal from the kitchen and went to go sit behind the waitress station. There were a few tables situated directly in front of the waitress station. We sat our plates down and were chatting when someone knocked on the other side of the wall. The waitress immediately ran over to the table thinking a customer came in, and she went over apologizing for ignoring them. No one was there. This one comes from Reddit user iJaeger. I used to work at a truck stop that was haunted by something that fancied itself a trickster. I'll condense it to the 3 best stories. The first happened all the time. We'd do all of our prep in the back kitchen and we'd put water on to boil, ground beef to brown, that sort of stuff. We got in the habit of checking our burners a few minutes after we started because most of the time they'd somehow be turned to off. Secondly, this only happened one time, but I was dicing onions and see what looked like a man walk right by me. I asked him if he needed help, but he just turned and walked toward the dry storage. I followed him in, only to find the room empty. Lastly, I was in the back kitchen again, and one of the line cooks comes bursting out looking for a fight. Now, to preface this, our freezer and the light switch for said freezer were both inside the walk-in. When he was in the freezer, the lights suddenly shut off, and he heard what sounded like a man laughing. He assumed it was me, but calmed down once I told him not only was it not me, but I had been in the other room the whole time, and no one else had gone into the walk-in. He got white as a sheet and just walked off mumbling, "F***ing ghost, man." Reddit user Stedge Gep writes, "My restaurant is an old gas station that was built in the 40s. We actually have a couple of ghosts. I've been in the building for 20 years. About 15 years ago, my daughter's best friend was one of our servers. She had the whole I see dead people vibe, and one day said to my daughters, 'Does your dad know there's a little kid watching him cook?' The way the kitchen is set up, at the end of the line there's a dry storage closet, and apparently this little wraith would just casually sit on the fryer oil boxes and watch the action down on the line. Over time, a few things became apparent. He didn't like other kids, and other kids could see him. Every kid that sat in our dining room would scream bloody murder. Secondly, he was afraid of the dark. There was a light bulb in the dry storage area that never went out, burned for 20 years straight. I've never found a switch for that light, and never found a breaker that would shut it off."
This one comes from Reddit user DW This. Once as a teenager, I was with friends and we stopped in at the Cork Street Tavern in Winchester, Virginia. Grew up near it, never been in before, and I was just going to use the bathroom. On my way towards the bathroom, I felt what seemed like someone sticking their foot out and trying to trip me. Thing is, no one was near me, customers or employees, and nothing at all on the floor or anything. Wasn't till a few years later I was reading a Ghosts of Virginia book, and the tavern was in there. Apparently, they claim it's the spirit of a man who hates women and likes to trip them.
Reddit user D Fahi, or is it D Fahay, writes, "I worked at a place that was someone's house back in the day, converted into a restaurant, kept the whole house structure. Super cool. The owner got his maid pregnant and killed the whole family in the house, including himself. Definitely haunted. A woman worked there for 30 plus years. She's still there. She wouldn't even talk about the stuff she'd seen there. She was so spooked by it." Reddit user Alive Citron 5873 writes, "I worked at a restaurant on the Jersey Shore. It was on the first floor of a 3-story building with apartments up top. One day I'm working on my own, doing prep in the back. The rest of the staff is across the street in their catering hall. I hear the chime of the front door ring and look up at the monitor trained on the front door. I see a rotund man about 40 years old. He's doing something with his arms, almost like he's popping and locking. I put down my knife, go through the French doors, and start to say, 'I'll be right with you.' By the time I get to you, a short distance, I'm in the dining room staring at nobody. I drop to my knees to see if he's under one of the tables, hiding underneath the tablecloth. Nobody. Check in the house smoke room. Nobody. Run outside to the deserted sidewalk. Nobody. I heard and saw somebody who disappeared. When the other workers came back in, I immediately told them of my experience. 2 employees told me, 'Oh, that's just the ghost of Ralph who died upstairs.' Was a disco king, apparently. Still likes to come visit, I guess." Here's a story from Reddit user Oh So Retro. We had a guest go into cardiac arrest during service, and they ended up dying in the dining room. One of the line cooks was taking pictures with his phone, and some of the others were like, "That's not a great idea." But this guy was taking video of the medics doing chest compressions and the whole bit. He took pictures of them covering him up and of them rolling him out sometime later. Many of the others were telling him he's going to catch a curse, etc., etc. Anyway, when we came in the next morning, the middle pane of a 3-pane window separating the kitchen from the dining room was shattered. Outer 2 were completely fine. Just the middle one completely shattered to bits. It's the same window dude was photographing from. Easily the spookiest thing I've ever seen in my life. Reddit user Sean Sucks shares his worst injury story. I put a 10-inch chef's knife through my left ring finger on a busy Saturday night. Cut down through the bone, severed the tendon. You're used to a certain amount of tension on your finger all the time that you don't really notice until it's gone. For a moment, I thought I'd cut my finger clean off. I had to take a deep breath and look down in the sink to make sure it wasn't just sitting there. I tried for a few minutes to wrap it up and get back to work, but quickly noticed my finger was just kinda flopping around and I could no longer bend it. I had to have surgery to reattach the tendon, but it was permanently shortened, and now my finger is just always kinda slightly bent. I can no longer straighten it all the way. I was in a bit of shock, I guess, because at first it didn't really hurt that much, just throbbed a lot. But when I got to the hospital and they told me to lay my hand on the table so they could examine it, and I really looked at it for the first time, I almost fell out of the chair I was in. -1 out of 10. Do not recommend. This car smells funny, writes. Worst I've seen was a tall cook we had who would always run to the walk-in to get product, having to turn a corner right by the fryers. I always got on him about it and tried to explain that the shoes are slip-resistant, not slip-proof. He was young and hard-headed, so he didn't listen. One night, goes flying around the corner and slips. He tries to catch his fall by grabbing the edge of the fryers and missed. Both arms went into the grease all the way down to the grates, halfway up his forearms, and we had to watch in horror as he screamed in agony and pulled his arms out. The skin bubbled and slid from his arms and hands. And if you think that's gross, Reddit user Living Master has a story for you.
Just went to some real hipster restaurant that Foursquare recommended to me about 2 weeks ago. Sat at the bar where I saw all the cooks prepare the food. Literally every worker there was male, had full sleeves, gauges, and were wearing beanies. The food was delicious. I ate every single bite of it. As I waited for my check, not one, but 2 cockroaches ran across the bar. At first I didn't notice, but the person I was sitting next to started stabbing the bar top with a knife, and I was like, "What the fuck are you doing?" Then I saw the roaches. One of them fell into my purse, and the other ran off towards the prep station. This also happened in front of 2 of the workers who simply laughed it off. They got 0 tip and then confronted me about it. I told them about the roaches and how they laughed about it instead of apologizing for it and comping something on the bill. They said that it wasn't their fault that roaches ran across, and since I already ate all my food, it didn't pose as a problem. So, not the right way to deal with that problem. Never returning there, and told all my friends to avoid that place as well. Fucking gross. Oh, and I ended up having to dump out my whole purse to make sure the other roach wasn't in there still. But it was. And I freaked out.
Reddit user Wygan writes, We were at Lucille's Smokehouse Barbecue. We all got our food and started to eat. This girl took a few bites, then stopped. She started to get a weird look on her face. She reaches in her mouth and pulls out a razor blade. It was a blade with a hole at the top, probably used to cut the meat for the salad. She tells the waitress, then the manager comes over within 2 seconds. Asks for the blade so they can give it to corporate. Yeah, right. Comps her meal and gives her a new salad of the same type. She starts to flip out, saying that she hadn't eaten it. She's never been there since. This one comes from Reddit user Mr. 501. Showed up at a restaurant and ordered breakfast. Then saw a couple leaving, and the maitre d' chased them down the street and asked them not to leave just yet. This happened a few times until there was a small group of people milling around outside giving each other what the fuck looks. Eventually, I overheard the maitre d' explaining, "I'm really sorry. There's been a small problem in the kitchen, but the chef is just now on the phone to the Poisons and Information hotline, so we'll be able to tell you more in a second. In the meantime, a waitress told us they wouldn't be able to serve us, so we should go." Curious, we joined the throng of people now standing around outside. Eventually, the maitre d' addressed us as a group and said, "I'm sorry to keep you all waiting here, but we just wanted to be sure about what has happened. The chef had set a large pot of water with caustic soda on the stove to boil in order to clean it. Unfortunately, our apprentice used the pot to poach your eggs. We've just checked with the Poisons and Information hotline, who told us that you will all probably be okay, because you would have started to show symptoms already had you been given a toxic dose. However, we need to inform you that should you display any of the following symptoms, you should seek medical attention immediately: vomiting, diarrhea, loss of hearing, loss of sight, bleeding from the eyes, ears, mouth, or anus, or any lesions appearing on your skin. Thank you all very much, and I'm sorry for the inconvenience." They closed that restaurant down a month or so later. Too long didn't read. Restaurant Poisons customers tells them to watch out for anal bleeding. Of course, if you can survive the ghosts, the disfiguring injuries, and the food, you still might have to deal with creeps and psychos. But don't take my word for it. Listen to what Reddit user Alternative Peace 186 has to say.
I was a bartender. This guy came in with his sister, who was a regular. Guess he wanted me, because he then kept coming back in. He didn't drink, he only ever had the free water, but he was there my entire shifts, demanding my attention and conversation. Then he got my number. I guess his sister, who had my phone number because I bought some clothing from her, gave him my number. At that point, I had to draw the line that I was not interested in pursuing anything, even just a friendship with him, and was just doing my job. I was also in a relationship with my high school sweetheart. We'd been together almost 6 years at that point. He freaked out and was verbally abusing me. He kept coming in, drinking only free water the whole 8-hour shifts, but now was watching me like a hawk and messaging the owner about how I need to be fired. The owner sent me screenshots. After sending the message, trying to get me fired, he texted me a pic of his POS old truck, bragging about how much money he has and how he can take care of me. Ugh. I wanted to ban this guy from the bar, and the owner didn't want to. Customer is king, you know. So I had to resort to, you're not making any money from him anyway. He takes up a seat the whole time, only getting free water, so he's not a customer. The owner's solution was to message him back, saying he can only be at the bar if he is a paying customer from now on. This unleashed hell He sent messages to the owner and me that he was dying of cancer, and it's cruel of me to not be there for him. Spoiler alert, he doesn't and didn't have cancer. Owner just reaffirmed I'm there to work, so he needs to be a paying customer to enter the bar. Well, he became a paying customer. He paid $1 a day for a cup of coffee that had free refills and still spent all my shifts there. Then he must have followed me home at some point. I lived only 1 block away from the bar. I'll never forget calling the police because he was sitting on the sidewalk in front of my place, staring at my window. Cops didn't come till next day when he wasn't there anymore, and said even if he was, it's not illegal to use the sidewalk. It kept happening. One night, I saw him standing on the sidewalk in front of my window, twirling a larger pocket knife. I contacted the cops. Not illegal. I asked about a restraining order because of that. Harassing my boss, stalking my job, blowing up my phone, and getting a burner phone every time I blocked him, etc. It took 4 hours for them to show up after calling that this man was showing off a weapon in front of my window. Cops said I didn't qualify for one because you can only get one against someone you were in a relationship with or living together with. Pocket knives are also not illegal. I was failed by everyone. And even though he is a registered sex offender that's not allowed to have social media, I still get friend requests from him almost a decade later. Though luckily, I don't live in that area anymore. An old regular from the restaurant industry by Reddit user Goldilocks 3.14. I like pie too. Sorry. I started waiting tables when I was 18 at a popular fast food chain, and soon enough I became acquainted with an older man named Tim. He's probably in his early to mid-60s and very obese. He would regularly come into the little diner that I worked at and was a regular prior to my employment there. The other younger females who worked in the restaurant didn't like to wait on him because he was kind of weird and had a creepy, overly excited / animated type of vibe. But I didn't mind because it was a guaranteed $5 to $10 every day. I was good at talking to people, good at putting up with bullshit, and I'm not someone to f*** with, so I happily entertained him in the family-friendly environment. The first thing he would do was make cartoons on the computer and excitedly give them to me or other servers. The other servers were uncomfortable with it, even though at this point it was very innocent. It was generic clip art that maybe had everyone's names written by each character. Still, some servers were uncomfortable enough that management had asked him to stop bringing them in. I could tell that making those cartoons made him happy. I just figured the guy was lonely, and there's nothing wrong with that. He started writing poems and short stories that had bad grammar and were so elementary they were almost painful. But he told me he just started to try it out, so I encouraged him, thinking he's lonely and needs a pastime. I had no problem with him writing little Hallmark card style poems and giving them to me. The slightly off-putting aspect to this was that all of the poems and stories had a general theme of love and family. Also, I think it was around this time that he started looking at my Facebook page regularly. He would occasionally Photoshop pictures of me from my Facebook page and put my face on a cartoon body or something like that. He also kind of started to obsess over the fact that I was a twin, and he became very interested in me and all of my sisters. He would write stories about the twins or the sisters, or make comic book style artwork about the twin superheroes. He even found a photo of my twin on Facebook somewhere and started using her face photoshopped on things too. After a year at my first serving job, I left for another serving job where I would be working weird or third shift kind of hours. I kind of thought that would be the end of Tim, but boy, was I wrong. He went out of his way to come at the weird hours and at the new place at least twice a week. I still maintained my fast food job, and he even started to visit me there at a place that people rarely come in and sit down to eat. Never once did I tell him my schedule. He would just drive by and see my car. Yes, you heard that right. The stories he would write became progressively more sexual and longer. One that sticks out was me being a super sexy badass cowgirl sheriff, and all the men of the saloon wanted me. He would include weird details like how someone had an STD. If I remember correctly, he made my sister the character that got an STD, and I had a huge issue with it. I decided to keep all the stuff he'd given me in my filing cabinet, just in case there was ever some type of case against him and I'd need evidence. My fiance finally convinced me to cut him off. It's also relevant to note he's been blocked from my Facebook, which I haven't even actively used in 2 years or more anyway. But prior to the cutoff, even shortly after the cutoff, he still sent me multiple messages on Facebook every day, from as simple as "Good morning, sunshine," to intricate and extensive stories. Just to recap, I first waited on him around May 2015. He followed me to my next job and my long-term fast food job around the middle of 2016 and continued to follow me. I cut him off around February or March 2018. Yes, you heard that right. 3 full years. When I was cleaning out my filing cabinet in December 2019, I stupidly decided that I can throw all the weird, creepy, unsolicited artwork away. It had been nearly 2 years with no issues, no attempt to contact, and the stuff was just cluttering my space. Last week, as I was sitting in my living room, a recognizable vehicle is parked outside of my driveway on the wrong side of the road. The man has his car window down and I see a flash. I quickly grab my glasses to try to discern what the fuck is going on. I see his childish, overly animated smile, and I recognize his hair and facial hair and realize the shirt he is wearing is the same exact type or style of shirt that Tim wears. I realize I recognize the vehicle because it's the same vehicle that would pull up to my place of employment 3 to 5 times a week for almost 3 years. Flash. I realize it's fucking Tim outside of my motherfucking residence over 2 years later, taking pictures of my home with that goddamn digital camera that he took my picture with twice before in the past. Motherfucker.
have to throw on your favorite true crime podcast before bed in order to fall asleep? Same. And it's the very reason that I created Serial Napper. My name is Nikki Young, and I'm here to lull you to sleep or perhaps to give you nightmares with some of the craziest true crime stories that you've never heard of. Each episode of Serial Napper features a different true crime story told succinctly the way that it happened. Just the facts, ma'am. My focus is on unsolved crimes that need more attention, cold cases, and wrongful convictions. While true crime shows can sometimes be graphic in nature, I ensure that the story is told in a way that is respectful to the victims and their families. Now, when it's time for bed, you can look forward to 30 minutes of well-researched and detailed case files while you get your beauty sleep. Find Serial Napper on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you like to listen to podcasts. Sweet dreams.
Listen up, true crime fans. I have a podcast that you won't want to miss. A heartfelt show that focuses on lesser-known crimes from around the globe called Our True Crime Podcast.
All right, buckle up, I guess. We gotta put our seatbelts on. We gotta go.
Every week, hosts Jen and Cam will guide you through a new case backed up by meticulous research and delivered with the utmost respect for victims and survivors. Cases like the fatal exorcism of Joan Vollmer.
Yes, eyes can turn red and appear to glow from increased adrenaline and blood flow.
I did not know that.
And the Haynes family massacre.
I'm almost afraid to hear it.
As a parent, I don't even know. I don't know.
You'll not only learn about the cases, you'll feel like you're part of a conversation with witty, lifelong friends. That's what truly makes this our true crime podcast. So whether you're a true crime aficionado,
I thought you might say that. I was hoping anyway.
Or a casual listener,
that's a baseball team, Jen, if you didn't know.
Oh, I figured it was some kind of sports ball thing.
Sit down and join us for our true crime podcast. Listen on your favorite podcast apps today.
It's a Sunday. I'm sitting in a dark, dark room talking to my best buddy about crime. That's right.
When you're alone in your house, but you'd like to feel like you're not, the podcast inside your house can keep you company. Our show will make sure that you run up the stairs at night when you turn off the lights and check under your bed before you sleep. We'll fill your dreams and nightmares with bizarre birds, creepy crawlers, and heroic hitmen. We'll have you pulling back the shower curtain, just in case, and side-eyeing your closets as you walk past them. We'll bring you everything from the classics that you know and love to the strange and often silly world of creepypastas. We've even got some stories written just for the show that you won't hear anywhere else. So go check out the podcast inside your house. We're on all major platforms, as well as inside your pantry, your crawl space, and sitting at the foot of your bed at night, watching you sleep.
Gonna go for it. 1 clip. This is Dungeon Punk. 1 clip, a montage of on-theme 80s ads.
We're going to Sayreville, New Jersey.
Ooh, the 80s.
No, I said that wrong.
29. Oh, and for 27, like, you're gonna have to do some like battle FX in the background of that shit.
31.
I mean, the guy was only 16 years old
17.
and he died. No, yep. I mean, the guy was 17 years old and he died before he could even.
Now for something completely fucking different.
And we're talking about the case. Nope, I don't even like the way I said that. The vibe was much darker. Today we're going to talk about the case of Ricky Casso. That's right. Yeah, that's what I've been saying, right? Ricky Casso? Yeah.
10A. Tetra astrolaben hazarta tanfir monotov menesian hazanzabar suma manda raspar dakis hakunda dunsa di azuda kanda tetra suma kandra tet. 10B. Tetra astrolaben hazarta tantir molotov menesian hazan sabar suma raspar suma monda raspar dakis akis hakundar dunsa di azura Candor tetra summa candra tet.
Note to art department, avoid Christian connotations in the design of this armor. It should also look pagan, just not evil. We will discover that the church are the big bad elsewhere in the series. The hero's masked helms and... Okay. We'll discover that the church are the big bad elsewhere in the series.
And he wasn't... That was terrible.
67, transition in and out of a podcast with the turning stations.
Hello, my friends.
Hey, Edward. Sorry it's taken us so long. It's been
busy. Also, it is lightning and thundering here, so if you hear something, please cut that out.
Yeah, well, I'm sure he did.
And
yeah.
He's wearing a good guy version of the witch hammer.
And then Wiki. Wiki, Whittle Wiki.
Whittle Wiki. Wiki Wackoon.
Wiki.
Witch King probably distorted. So the bitch has got away. Deliver her back to me. Dark side. Okay, let's see, what do I say? So, the bitch has got away. Deliver her back to me. Deliver her back to me. Deliver her back to me. So, the bitch has got away. Deliver her back to me. Yeah, fuck it.